Hello YouTubers! It is this time of the year again where we will have an old rancho tradition, annual tradition. Rosie girl is going to make the annual apple pie with our homegrown apples. We have an apple tree in the back of the lot and we had a huge apple harvest this year, so I'm really excited to now come into the kitchen, and the Rosie girl is already awaiting you to then explain what is next on the agenda with getting the apple pie made.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome into the Rancho kitchen. As Jen mentioned, it is that time of year where we really love to make an apple pie, but not just any apple pie. We have an ultra special one because we're lucky enough to have our own apple tree amongst all of our tremendous quantity of fruit trees here. We have a Heritage Gravenstein apple. If you haven't heard of it, it's a local variety. It's very good for eating out of hand, baking. It's an all-around saucing. It is a great apple. But the problem is, and why it's not nationwide, is it doesn't keep real well in shipping. But lucky us, we have one here, and it's a wonderful variety. It has it's basically greenish with the red stripes on it there. So I went out and picked, I guess about 7 or so apples here, 6, 7, 8 apples. We're going to go ahead and use our 9-inch apple pie plate here and make us a beautiful apple pie. It's an easy recipe too. The tricky part is getting the crust right and making sure that you prep your apples so that they're firm when you cut the pie and that they don't ooze all over the place. And I'll show you some tricks for doing that today too. So, without any further ado, let's make our annual Rancho apple pie. Let's go ahead and check our ingredient list for the apple pie. It really couldn't be easier. I have, what do I have? 3, 6, 8, 9 apples here, and I want to make sure I have enough apples sitting in the 9.5-inch pie plate that I know it'll fill it up nicely. You want to sort of over prepare as opposed to under prepare, because this is a little bigger than your standard 8-inch pie, so I want to make sure it fills up all the way. Okay, so we need our good apples, and these are some of the best that we picked off the tree out back. Going to need some shortening too, about 1/4 cup of shortening. This is very important. The best pie crust, I'm sorry to say, for those of you who may not be into shortening and believe that it is a negative thing, it actually has less saturated fat than butter in it, believe it or not. It's going to make a very crispy crust, so we're going to need some of that. We're going to need a 1/2 stick of butter, another 1/4 cup of butter there. We're going to need a cup of sugar, granulated sugar. We're going to need about 2.5 cups of flour, because 2 to 2 1/4 cups we need to make a bottom crust and a top one. Going to use a little bit of vanilla extract and a little bit of vinegar too to make the dough a little pliant for rolling it out, so it's easier. It helps it relax a little more, the gluten in it, and it's very important to have it easy to roll out. And lastly, we're going to top our pie with some sugar in the roller, what they call turbinado sugar. And it gives a nice taste texture on the top, and it adds some sparkle to the pie too. It really turns out nice. And you're also going to need a mixing bowl to start preparing your dough. But the first thing I need to do is to wash my apples thoroughly and then go ahead and get them peeled. I'm going to spare you that. I'm going to cut them into halves. Make sure you take out all the core and everything and all the skin, and then once you've cut it in halves, cut it into about four pieces lengthwise and then 3 across. We don't want big chunks of apple in the pie because you want to be able to slice nice slices here. Okay, see you in a little bit. As I'm peeling the apples, by the way, I want to add a little bit of lemon juice to the water that they're going to sit in. That will keep the apples from turning brown. A couple tablespoons in there should do just fine. Add back some of this lemon water. All right, to keep them from discoloring. So go ahead and cut up the rest of these into good sized chunks. Usually takes four down the side. You might get a little extra off of them, but it's not worth fiddling with. And then as long as they're not real big chunks, you don't want them to reduce to sauce, but you want them small enough that the pie will cut easily. So, okay, there we go. I do like to dry fit the apples into the pie crust. They're going to cook down a bit when we macerate them in some sugar, and they'll release their juices. So it's definitely going to result in some shrinkage here, so I want to make sure it's definitely overfilled with it's better to err on the side of more than less. So I'm going to transfer these to the big pot, and I'm going to pour 1 cup of sugar on them and stir it thoroughly, and I'm going to add in a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of nutmeg too. About a teaspoon of cinnamon and half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and just 1/8 of a teaspoon of clove. Clove is very, very strong, and we don't want it. It's very easy for clove to dominate. I don't want that to happen. And I decided to use a half a teaspoon of allspice because that incorporates everything together. So, and it makes it easier for me to moderate. I get very nervous about the cloves. One time I used a little too much clove, and it was just a clove pie. So, okay, I've got all of my spices in here now. Now it's just a question of letting them sit in here. They're going to release juices for a while here as the apples macerate. And soaking in sugar and then infusing them with that spice flavor. So you can see I have a good even coating. And I will be reducing this down and adding a touch of cornstarch to it before we put it into the pie shell. But now it is time to clean up over here, and let's prepare our crusts. Now, to a lot of people, preparing the crust is the make or break thing when it comes to doing a pie, because it's something that is difficult for a lot of people, but it's something also that with practice you get better and better and get a natural feel. The best way to do it is to get in there with your fingers and press your fats into the flour. As you'll see, add some ice cold water. Keep all of your ingredients, the butter and shortening, ice cold, and when it comes time to add them in, they'll combine well. What you don't want is softened butter that's going to melt and create a sticky kind of mess. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the counter and be back with you guys in 1 minute. Let's talk about another trick here too, because I am preheating my oven now to 450 degrees, and I want to do something very tricky to keep that bottom crust from being soggy. One of the biggest disappointments when people make pies is the bottom crust never really cooks. The reason being it doesn't have enough direct heat on the bottom to penetrate, cook that crust, and well, it's only really designed to cook the apples inside. But here is my solution. I like to go ahead, take my baking pan, This is a round one I use for pizza here, and I like to put it right on the bottom of the oven floor, okay? Because for the first 10 minutes that I'm baking this pie, it is going to sit directly on that baking sheet. Is going to be piping hot, and so much heat is going to transfer in that first 10 minutes, direct heat transfer, that crust is going to be as flaky and golden on the bottom as it is on the top. Okay, so a very nice little hack there. Make sure you're sitting it on a pan. Don't sit it directly on the floor of the oven. Some people will, but you might get bubble over and you have a real mess on your hands. I do have a convection oven. You can see the fan in the back there, my nice Fisher Paykel. So I'm going ahead and preheating that to 450 degrees. And now it's time to get on with making the crust. Just as an aside, you can see how much juice the apples have already released here. And when we go to cook them down, it's going to release even more. And that is going to be a very potent flavor in there. Alright, what we want to do first, make sure your counter is really clean. And I'm going to start with 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. Put that in there. I'm going to add a pinch of salt. Salt gives structure. Go ahead and move that off to the side. Now I want to whisk that around real well. Guys always like the whisking part. I never understand why. Okay, and I want to stand by with my, I'm going to put a little bit of sugar in here too. Just to kind of sweeten it up. And if I had some ginger, I would throw about 1/4 teaspoon of ginger in there, because that would give it a little bit of a bite to it, the crust. There's a nice offset to the sweetness of the apples, sweet apple, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Hope you're getting excited. I am, just thinking about apple pie. I'm going to go ahead and cut about 1/4 of a cup of shortening out. And this is a little more difficult for me to handle, and I'm going to go ahead and add that in to the pie crust, just a little bit more. I know I'm wanted eyeballs, people, but trust me, about 1/4 cup there. We want 1/2 pound of fats, 1/2 cup of fats altogether. So yeah, just a little tad more there, and this is what gives the ultimate crispiness to the pie. So go ahead and add that in, and then I'm going to take 1/2 stick of butter. I'm going to add that in too. Pop that right in. Always make sure your hands are thoroughly clean. Don't leave any wrapper from the butter on or anything like that, okay? I've seen it. So then we're going to go ahead. I'm going to cut that butter into smaller pieces here. And I'm going to use what's called the 2 knife method. And it's kind of the French way. They don't really use pastry cutters when they're cutting in fat. They generally will take the 2 knives like I'm doing. It's a little noisy, but it gets you right down in your work there. And there's something very satisfying about doing it with the technique of the way that the way that the French do it. You do it properly. You don't have near the noise. Also, if you use a ceramic bowl. All right. You can see I've got that into pretty fine chunks right now. Now comes the fun part. If you enjoy working with your hands, it's like a throwback to kindergarten with Play-Doh. You're going to go in there and you're going to smear those fats right into the butter. And this is what gives a great crust. You want to crush down those fats right in to the flour. Okay? I just had the butter. crust that butter and shortening right into the flour, and you'll see that the consistency starts to change and it takes on a more crumbly texture. And what you're doing is evenly distributing all of those fats, and they're going to bubble up in the crust. And boy, are they going to make it good. Woo! Make sure to work it all in real well. You want it to be reduced down to pea-sized chunks, and this is going to make 2 dough balls. One we're going to use for the top crust and one we're going to roll out for the bottom. Okay? Look at how nice that looks now. Now we can go ahead and add, I got a little bit of ice cold ice water. Make a well in the bottom there, just like that, and add about a tablespoon at first, right in the middle, and stir it rapidly. You don't want any wet spots. You want everything uniform, and you can see already that the dough, that the pie crust wants to come together in here. So we're going to go ahead and add our 2nd tablespoon. And make sure it's ice cold, because if it's ice cold, it helps keep the fats from melting. Okay? Okay, I'm going to add one more little bit here. Ultimately, I usually add about 2.5 tablespoons of ice cold water in here. Now we're going to gather that into a bowl, and we're going to put it on our counter here, just like that. Form it a little more, get all of those fats distributed. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that into the refrigerator a little bit, just to cool down so that the fats don't melt. I want to turn my attention now to the fruit in the pot there. It's done macerating. Okay? See you in a little bit.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to check on the progress of the apple pie and see how Rosie's getting along with the yummalicious baking.
You're just in time. Can you smell anything yet? Cinnamon or apple?
Yeah, I can smell both.
You're German Norwegian, so
Apple,
you know the good apple.
similicious apple.
What do they call the apple pie in German?
Apfelkuchen, Apfelstrudel.
Apfelstrudel, huh? The strudel chopnik, the strudel. I see you make good strudel chopnik. Anyway, guys, we're now cooking down the apples here, and they're going to reduce in size a lot. And this is another hack. You want to pre-cook your apples before you put them into the pie crust. Another big disaster people have is they put the apples in, they throw a little bit of cornstarch in, then they go to cut the pie and it just, well, it runs all over the place. So the thing you want to do, there's also big gaps in the pie between the crust and the pie because the apples reduce when you're cooking them in the pie. If you pre-cook them, they're not going to reduce. They're going to fill up the whole inside of the pie crust. Jen, if you bring it in close, you can see all that glorious juice that's been released in here from those apples. And we're actually going to reduce that down. And then at the end, we're going to put in some cornstarch, thicken it up a little bit, then set our mix aside and add it into our crust. Our pie crust dough is cooling in the oven now, so things are coming together. It's going to be very rapid from here on out. So, all right, I'm really getting excited. Woo. What also happens with this method is the apples get more infused with the cinnamon and the nutmeg flavors, and that's very important. Also, the liquid retains any excess flavors, and it gives between filling in the pie when it thickens up, and it makes it really, really nice. I'm actually going to cook these down for a couple more minutes. And I have my cornstarch here. I'm going to add a tablespoon of cornstarch in a little while, and I'm going to keep stirring this until it's right on the verge of thickening, and then just before I put the pie filling in, I'm going to add 1 more quarter teaspoon of cornstarch. I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to cut into something that's like a jello at the end. So, okay. All right, that's coming along really good. It's starting to bubble up good. So actually I want that to reduce a little more. That'll thicken because of the sugar in there. So the more I can thicken it naturally, the better that it is. You can see the steam is releasing water, which is exactly what we want. Okay, that's going to be glorious. That's going to be glorious. That's now cooked down enough. I want to add my cornstarch. Spread that around real good. Keep that stirring good. Wait till that cornstarch thickens it up. We want it to pour like a molasses by the time it's thickened up, so that the juice begins to stick to the apples. As you can see here. Just like that. Okay. So that's about as thick, I think, as that's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off now. And I'm going to sit my pot over there. And now I'm going to turn my attention back to the crust. Alright, I've got my dough ball out, and I'm going to remove about 1/3 of it or so. And I'm going to use that for the top crust here. So now I'm going to make sure your countertop is really clean. I always clean mine thoroughly. Then we want to put a liberal amount of flour on here. And by the way, I forgot when I made the dough to tell you guys, I also added a 1/2 teaspoon of vinegar in there. That helps relax the gluten. Okay, let's go ahead now and form that into a ball here. Okay. Make sure everything's floured real well. And rolling pin. We're going to go ahead and roll this out. We don't want any thick spots. We don't want any thin spots. Go all the way to the edge. And every time you lift it up and turn it, make sure. Oops, we lost our lighting there. Make sure that you throw some flour underneath of it. Okay. Very, very important. And try to keep the flour mainly on the bottom as opposed to the top of the crust. That way it'll seal up good. And if you have any spots that open up or anything, just go ahead and pinch them closed with your fingers. That's already starting to look pretty good. And you can also use a spatula if you want a little bit of lift, if it's starting to get a little bit sticky. Go ahead and use that. Alright. Turn that a little more. Shouldn't need too much more on that. We want to roll that out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Okay. Nice flat scraper is good for this too. Remember, if you have anything that opens up, just seal it. Now I can put a little bit of flour on top for my final rolling here. And then I can hold my pie shell upside down, and I think that that's going to be perfect. Now the next trick I want to show you is actually rolling this onto the rolling pin. And as you do that, sort of roll it up on it. Then you want to sit your pie plate down and just unroll it right over the top, just like that. And you can spread it. Now you're going to have some spots that are not enough dough, and you can move it over. You can form the dough inside where you have some spots that are too little. Like over on this, I like over on this side here. I can add a little more over there, a little more right there, so it's all uniform all across. Okay, isn't that nice? All right, perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead. Just make sure all my dough's pressed together good. I don't want it falling apart. I also want to make sure I don't have any openings in the bottom there. Now it's simply a matter of taking my filling, and I added 1 more quarter teaspoon of starch. Should want to do a final thickening there. Now I go ahead, I add that in real well. Remember, your fats are melting now, so you have to kind of work quickly here. Get all that goodness in there. Now I'm going to sit that on the side, and I'm going to roll out my top crust here. Okay. Let's go ahead. Since that's starting to get a little bit of sticky, I'm going to add a little more flour to that. Oops, lost our light again there. Let's sit that up. Sorry about that. I'm experimenting, trying to get a little more light in here for doing these so people can see them a bit better. All right. We want to roll that out. And don't forget, when you lift it, make sure to put flour underneath of it to keep it from sticking. That pretty thin. Okay. I think that looks pretty good. So we'll try to once again roll it up on the pin. Just like that. If you have any stickies, just kind of join them together. Just kind of infill with that. We'll put this over here. We'll go ahead and we'll add our top crust right on top like so. And now we'll kind of trim that. There's a lot of dough here. So we'll kind of trim any areas that seem to have an excess hanging over the side. We're going to do what's called a fluting on the edge, but we don't need all of this to do a good job, and that looks pretty good. All right, so the next thing we want to do is to seal those together. So I'm kind of pressing them together first, go all the way around the edge, and I press those seams together. And I want to add a little more right in here. Press those seams together. That'll prevent a big bubble out there. Gather them and press them together. Now I want to go around the edge, and with my thumb and forefinger, my 2 fingers on my left hand, I want to go ahead and give me a chance to do a secondary seal on that crust, and I want to go ahead and add a fluting around the edge here, just like so. You know what? It's starting to really look like an apple pie now. Okay? It's starting to look really pretty. So I want to gather all this up and remove this. Don't want anything sticking to the bottom. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to take our knife and we want to open some slits on top. You try to do that in a kind of uniform way that will allow the steam to escape. Then I want to shake some turbinado sugar on top. Nice liberal dosing. And I'm going to put this into the oven on the bottom rack, remember, for an initial 10 minutes, okay? Be very careful with that. Don't burn yourself. I will see you guys in 10 minutes. All right, our 10-minute mark is going off. Now this, you got to be really careful. Glove up. You don't want to touch this rack when you're moving this pie. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move the pie off the bottom and then sit it up on the upper rack. And we're going to go about, take a look at it. We're going to go about 20 more minutes here. And then we'll see what she looks like then. I'm also going to back the heat down to about 400, okay? See you in 20 minutes. Missy Jen sniffing here. Waiting for that first hint of apples and nice crust, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves.
Waiting for the first slice of heaven.
And I'll tell you what, Jen, if you start your pies on the floor of the oven, sitting on a pan and preheated real good to 450, you put your pie on the bottom of the oven for 10 minutes, I guarantee you that bottom crust is going to be thoroughly cooked. People are going to be impressed that you really know how to make a pie. Okay? See you in 20 minutes.
Curtsy.
Are you ready for some pie? Our total bake time, if we put, I added a little more. We have 10 minutes initially on the bottom, and then I put 35 minutes on the top at 425 degrees. So we're going to go ahead now. Our timer is going off here. Be very careful. And it's already bubbling over. You can see how beautiful that looks, that pie. So the bubbling over tells me that the fruit is to hit its set point. We're going to go ahead and let that cool down really well. That looks beautiful. I'll bet that's going to taste good. You can just see a little bit of the fruit bubbling out right there. She vented well. Nothing ended up coming out the side. That is going to be an amazing tasting pie. I want to thank everyone for being along today. We love to make pies and desserts here, especially when we can use our own fruit from the rancho. And I tell you what, I guarantee you when we show the slicing of this pie, you'll see how well done the crust is on the bottom. And this should be a very, well, it should be an excellent eating experience. So we'll let that cool down all day long. We'll slice it up a piece tonight. I know Missy Jen can't wait. Thanks a lot for being along again, guys, with the apple pie bake. I'll see you this evening. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say, while the proof of the apple pie is in the eating. And, well, see you tonight. Let's get her a piece of pie cut. If we look at the bottom there, we can see it's nice and brown and golden on the bottom, which signifies what? That the bottom has a nice crust on it, right?
Crispy.
Nice and crispy.
Crust.
And not wimpy. The first piece is always very difficult to get out. You do a pie. That looks pretty good. More for you, your little bonus footage. Extra for you on the side there, Missy. Nice glorious apple pie. So we'll get Missy Jen a seat and we'll let her have a go at it.
Looks delicious.
Ooh. I'm nipping a piece. Oh, Jesus. What a waste. Right down on the floor. Okay. See you in a minute. I don't know why the second piece is always a cleaner cut there, and I'm gonna join Missy Jen even though I'm supposedly to be on a diet. Ha ha ha. All right, Jen, the proof of the pie is in the eating.
Start the diet tomorrow.
Yeah, start the diet tomorrow. All right, here goes the Missy's gonna have a go at this and see if it appeals to her, and make sure to get the right crunch on the nice crusty crust. Taking it all in.
Let me get another scoop.
There we go. Get a good piece there.
They say usually the second one is when you get the
Yeah, the
real
second bite's when you get that flavor explosion there. Here we go. Kaboom. Win, win, win.
It's delicious.
There we go. Bottom all nicely done.
It's an absolute winner.
No raw dough. Hashtag no raw
It is
dough.
the best apple pie in the world, people.
There we go. You heard it from the Missy. Anyway, we're going to let her eat in peace. Thank you very much for being along today. A lot of fun making an apple pie, especially when you're using what? Our own apples here.
That's right. Homegrown on the ranch.
There we go. Thanks, everybody. Thumbs up or appreciate it. And share.
That's right.